The history of South Sudan is one marked by great political strife and turmoil. South Sudan first existed as part of Sudan in one unified entity before they gained independence in 1956. The earliest records of settlement in the area date back to as far as 3000 BCE. Three distinct kingdoms, the Dinka, the Nur, and the Shilluk, existed as dominant communities, each with their own culture, economies, and political structures. Sudan was initially conquered by the Egyptian Empire in 1820, but Sudanese resistance efforts led to the involvement of the British Empire. In 1899, the formation of an Anglo-Egyptian condominium formalized joint Egyptian and British control. In the 1920s, the British implemented the Southern Policy. The policy aimed to develop South Sudan separately from the North. However, the policy only served to exclude the South and make it more economically disadvantaged. The North developed with more Arabic culture, with its occupants majority Muslim, while the South developed as largely Christian. Furthermore, the Northern elites were integrated into the colonial administration, further deepening the divide. The 1947 Juba Conference was a British attempt to reunify the North and South parts of Sudan. Though they legally unified the two parts, they failed to consult with Southern leaders, leading to a rushed and incomplete joining of the states. It didn't take long for conflict to ensue in Sudan after independence. It began in 1956 and lasted until 1972. The South sought political autonomy but was ignored, while the North responded with military power and Southern neglect. The war lasted about 17 years and resulted in between 500,000 and 1 million deaths. The 1972 Addis Ababa Agreements granted the South limited autonomy and reintegrated former rebels into the national military and civil service. The agreement halted violence but failed to address the underlying inequalities that led to the conflict. The discovery of oil in Sudan in 1978 was an important part of Sudanese history. The oil served as an economic catalyst that only increased the intensity of the warfare that occurred after this period. The Second Civil War began in 1983 and lasted until 2005, when the president violated the agreement set forward by the Addis Ababa Agreements by dissolving the autonomy of the South, imposing Sharia law, and attempting to take federal control of oil fields nationwide. The actions catalyzed a southern resistance movement led by Sudan People's Liberation Army. Throughout the war, about 2 million people died and 4 million were displaced. The Darfur War, now called a genocide by many countries, began in western Sudan as a separate conflict from the ongoing civil war. Non-Arabic ethnic groups accused the central government of discrimination and neglect. In response, the government armed Arab militia groups to carry out a series of ethnic cleansing. Over the years, several atrocities were committed in this region. In 2009, the International Criminal Court indicted President Omar al-Bashir for genocide and crimes against humanity for what occurred in the Darfur region. Though not part of the Sudanese civil war, the conflict shows how underlying causes for the country's instability remained unresolved. Conflict is still ongoing in this area. In 2005, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed, marking a formal end to the Second Sudanese Civil War. It established a ceasefire and laid out a system for sharing power and oil revenue. Most importantly, the CPA also included a provision for a referendum to be held in 6 years, which allowed for the people of South Sudan to vote on whether to remain part of Sudan or pursue independence. In 2011, 6 years after the agreement was signed, South Sudan voted overwhelmingly in favor of independence, officially dividing the country into two. After their newfound independence, it didn't take much time for conflict to once again brew in South Sudan. President Kerr and his Vice President Makar existed at crossroads with each other. From the beginning of their terms, tensions existed as they belonged to two different ethnic groups. President Kerr was a Dinka, and Vice President Makar a Nur. Soon the people, military, and the government became divided. President Carr was accused of consolidating power, while Vice President Makar was openly critical of the president's movements. In 2013, tensions escalated when President Kerr dismissed his entire cabinet, including Vice President Makar, in a display of power. Violence ensued after the president publicly accused Vice President Makar and his allies of attempting a coup. Tensions continued rising as Makar denied the allegations, and fighting along ethnic lines and political alliances ensued. The conflict displaced millions, causing thousands of deaths, and led to outbreaks of cholera, famine, and poverty throughout the country. In 2015, Kerr and Makar signed an agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan. This tentative peace was pushed heavily by the international organization and halted the civil war. However, the agreement quickly proved weak and faltered, and just the next year, fighting once again broke out between the forces. In 2018, the leaders met once again to attempt a peace agreement. They established the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan. Makar was reinstated as vice president, and a unity government was formed. It started a stronger vow than the previous attempts, but were still tenuous. Tensions between the president and the vice president still existed, and violence still occurred locally, especially in rural areas around the country. Tensions continued to escalate. The national election, which was postponed to 2024 and then again to 2026, is a source of frustration amongst many citizens. Furthermore, the peace agreement quieted most major acts of violence, but local warfare by smaller groups still remained. On March 4th, the White Army overran an army barracks in South Sudan. According to a UN report, the government responded with aerial bombardments on civilian areas. Many international organizations have attempted to engage in diplomatic efforts but were unsuccessful. The country is now at serious risk of delving back into another civil war. The tensions in South Sudan are still ongoing as new news arrives from the region every day. Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into South Sudan's history.
Thank you for watching our History in the Headlines episode. If you enjoyed this series, be sure to like this video and comment on what history you want us to dive into next. If you're interested in how we make our timelines, you should check out Cleovis. Follow us on all of our socials linked in the description.